Schneider from Battle Tested Solutions, bringing you Tier 1 training for our dynamic world. To talk about today, antiterrorism and counterterrorism. Often these terms are used interchangeably by members of the media, by government, by organizations, in the newspapers, and which leads to the question, essentially, what is anti-terrorism and what is counterterrorism? Are they one and the same? Are they different? What is the relation to terrorism of both these terms? So I thought I'd dig a little deeper into the terminology, not from a semantics type of approach, but from more of an experience type of approach. In my opinion, anti-terrorism are those preventative measures deployed by governments and private sector institutions and organizations to deter a terrorist event from happening. But what are these measures? What are these avenues to use to prevent acts of terrorism from happening? Such tools could be in the form of public policies and procedures that could limit individuals and certain groups from entering one country or another. We see signage at certain facilities and high population centers stating to those that want to enter such a facility that their bags may be subject to search, to remove all items from their belongings, much like in an airport. And that is a great example of, okay, we want to prevent an incident of terrorism from happening. Let's institute certain policies and procedures, as well as a technological solution and a human factor solution in preventing an act of terrorism from happening. Now, on the anti-terrorism side of the coin, we have much of it driven by governments, but an active partner in much of the anti-terrorism pursuit, if you will, is the private sector, in the form of industries and organizations, from security companies, from even insurance companies, that all have tools to help the greater good in preventing an act of terrorism from occurring. Now, terrorism in itself is quite hard to define. There are about 1,000 different definitions. For the one I like to stick to is the use of force or threat of force to influence political or social change towards non-combatants, obviously by violent means. Again, different organizations have their different definitions. FBI towards non-combatants, obviously by violent means. Again, different organizations have their different definitions. FBI from DHS, and definitely international. I like to stick to is the use of force or threat of force to influence political or social change by towards non-combatants, obviously by violent means. Again, different organizations have their different definitions. FBI from DHS, and definitely internationally. Some of the individuals involved in anti-terrorism and preventive measures are your perhaps security consultants that get hired by private institutions or to enact or to evaluate, perhaps security consultants that get hired by private institutions or to enact or to evaluate that organization's risk towards a terrorist incident. Now, not every organization does this or deploys some type of anti-terrorism measure. Often it is done just as part of an all-hazards approach. Organizations and facilities and critical infrastructure want to protect themselves from any type of house of worship or an explosion, definitely at large public event will even though it may kill 4 or 5 or 10 people, will often send ripples across a community and even a country, versus a standalone type of violent act. There is a purpose and a message of a terrorist act. So the types of tools we see on that anti-terrorism side of the coin, as I may have mentioned, a policy, procedure, certain barriers that will inhibit, or I should say dissuade, someone engaged in some form of terrorism or in support of terrorism. If it's someone doing hostile surveillance and they notice, wow, there's an active security force here, there's lots of cameras, there's signs, or in support of terrorism. If it's someone doing hostile surveillance and they notice, wow, there's an active security force here, there's lots of cameras, there's signage, it's hard for me to even survey my intended target. I'm not going to do this, and may go to a different place or a different target, or abandon the idea altogether and take maybe even a peaceful pursuit in promoting their agenda, or I should say less violent pursuit in promoting their agenda. Now, when a terrorist incident happens, then the tree gets shaken, so to speak. It is often then the responsibility of a government, whether it be even state or municipal, but mostly a federal government's responsibility in responding to an act of terrorism. Now, terrorism could be international in nature, and definitely you'll have that federal response. But there's also domestic terrorism, where it could be the state or a city or some type of government jurisdiction or authority will lead the charge in conducting counterterrorism operations. So what are counterterrorism operations? They are things such as stop and frisk of a certain neighborhood or individual, arrests, raids, and then definitely at the federal and national level, military strikes, sophisticated intelligence operations designed to disrupt and destroy and degrade that terrorist group. Now, private citizens don't really have the bandwidth, so to speak, to conduct such operations, though that's not to say they cannot be part of the counterterrorism equation. A good example is the organization called Sharut Hadin. They're based in Israel. And what essentially they do is they legally sue organizations that fund and sponsor terrorist groups. They will target actually countries or authorities and other groups or banks that say that have used that banks have allowed, I should say, terrorist movements to use their banks to fund operations or to transfer money for weapons. Well, this organization, Sharut Hadin, targets those banks. So that is, in a way, a counterterrorism tool from a private sector institution. They're actually a nonprofit institution. Generally, though, the counter-terrorist option is after that terrorist attack. And again, often under the purview of a government. So when we drill it down to, okay, can an individual identify him or herself as providing counterterrorism services? Not quite, except perhaps in a support role. If you are, let's say, a tactical trainer, private sector tactical trainer, but you have developed a type of system that could be useful by government forces in training, or even in intelligence organizations can adapt or deploy such a system in their fight against terrorism, that perhaps you could be in that counterterrorism circle, if you will. Mostly those in the security world are on the preventative side. We want to put forth barriers in the figurative sense to deter terrorist groups from enacting their plan. And there's no, it's not like one anti-terrorism is less sexy than counterterrorism. It's just a different roles and responsibilities, though it's all part of the same coin and geared towards reducing the opportunity of future terrorist attacks. Anyhow, thank you for listening. This is this is one of my first few videos, so sorry if it's a little, if it jumps all over the place a little bit. Please feel free to find me on Facebook at Battle Tested Solutions, or on Greg Schneider on LinkedIn, and even like and share this video. Welcome interaction, and stay safe and have a great day.